startups continue to gain more traction in the Philippines. Latest data from the Trade Department reveals venture capitalists have invested more than 27 billion pesos in startups as of 2020. Which sector startups are showing the biggest potential? Let's get some insights now from Gobi-core Philippine Fund's Carlo Delantar. Carlo, thank you so much for joining us on The Final Word. As a venture capitalist, you are early investors in startup companies. What do you look for in a startup company?
Thanks for having me, Rico. For us, when we look at the startups in the Philippines, first we need to understand the lay of the land, right? The startup ecosystem has been super nascent for the past few years, but during this pandemic, definitely a banner year where we're seeing the iron triangle, which basically means fortifying the e-commerce, logistics, and finance industry to see thriving startups outside of it, but also inside of it. So to answer your question, first, it's very important to have fundamentally built startups, right? Understanding what are customer-centric, provide value for for customers, but also making sure that they see sustainability as part of their plans.
You mentioned about the iron triangle. In which specific sectors have you found potential and opportunity?
That's a great question. So at the moment, we're seeing e-wallets in the finance industry. In terms of logistics, we're also seeing a lot more of different last mile delivery, all the way to the connection between e-commerce, where we're seeing food delivery as well. But interestingly enough, the first startup that really created more value than anyone else compared for independent startups is Kumu, which really benefited from the iron triangle. And we're seeing that sooner or later, we'll see more of those startups coming out starting next year.
You mentioned Kumu. It's now a very popular social media platform. And you've also invested in startups like Tier 1, Cloud Eats, a flower store, to name a few. What makes these companies strong startups in the ecosystem?
That's a great question, Rika. Well, Kumu, definitely the team and their vision of supporting the global Filipino community. We see that Filipinos are everywhere globally, and we see that culture of being Pinoy really shows a lot of value, and it's seeped into different parts of the world. And not surprisingly, the Kumu app has been top rated and top most downloaded for a lot of countries, more than 10 countries. But for the other startups, what we see is they've emerged and thrived during this pandemic because we see that the digital acceleration that the tech startup ecosystem has been waiting for more than 5-7 years. It's finally here, and definitely this is the banner year we've been waiting for, and we're celebrating this week during this Philippine Startup Week.
And I'm sure most of these digital startups were basically founded from the comforts of their home. And when you invest in a startup, Carlo, is it key that your group takes management control?
Oh, not necessarily, Rico. What's important is to see what solution they provide, and it tackles a specific problem in the country, right? So if we talk about Cloud Eats, they see what's happening in the food industry. Of course, it's being battered during this pandemic, but we see that using the iron triangle and the right digital solutions to actually provide value during this pandemic balloon them to where they are now. And of course, the co-founder Kimya, who is a female CEO, is the most funded Filipina at the moment during this time. And you can see that down the line, we're seeing most of the Filipinos nationwide that will be using the digital economy long-term. And we're seeing over 90% of them continuing post-pandemic.
And we're also seeing the gender gap between male and female startup founders in the Philippines narrowing, especially during the last 19 months. But how important is it, Carlo, that the startup that you invest in as well has the potential not only here in the Philippines, but go regional or even global?
Thanks, Rico. Core Capital, we're actually a venture capital firm based in the Philippines. We're local, by Filipinos, we're independent for Filipinos, and we really provide early stage financing for tech companies. And for our first early stage fund called the Gobi-core Philippine Fund, it's important being co-managed with Gobi partners, being completely interconnected in the Pan-Asian region. It's important we talk about ESGs, right? So in the Philippines, not surprisingly, and we were hoping that it would catch on really fast, when we were mapping the startups and we're estimating over 1,000 startups already during this year, we've seen that from what we've mapped of over 700 startups, we realized from 2015, we saw there was only one female founder or CEO to the ratio of 5 male founder in the tech startup. But
Right.
we've seen during this year that we're seeing that that's below 2. So it's now 1:2 or exactly
That's fantastic.
1.8.
That's great
It's
news. So, the year of the startups in the Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us on The Final Word, Carlo Delantar of the Gobi-core PH Fund.